You know, in electrical engineering, there is a safety mechanism known as a circuit breaker. And when a system detects a massive surge of electricity, like one that threatens to burn the entire house to the ground, it doesn't wait to investigate where the surge came from or who is ultimately at fault.
Right, it just snaps.
Exactly, it just snaps. The power is cut instantly to prevent a catastrophe. And on April 10, 2026, the California Democratic Party acted, well, exactly like a circuit breaker. They instantly cut power to Eric Swalwell's gubernatorial campaign.
Yeah, the timeline on that was staggering.
It really was. Within a span of 24 hours, you have this front-running candidate who went from having massive political momentum to watching his campaign just completely collapse. And this was driven by severe allegations of misconduct that emerged simultaneously from the San Francisco Chronicle and CNN. So today we are exploring the profound intellectual tension at the heart of this collapse.
The fundamental clash between political accountability and due process.
Right, because on one side of the ledger, we have to ask whether swift and brutal political excommunication must precede a formal legal investigation when multiple, severely corroborated allegations emerge.
And on the other side, we have to ask whether an immediate campaign collapse, one driven entirely by unadjudicated journalistic reports, critically undermines the presumption of innocence. Does stepping in before the law can even get involved completely bypass the foundational concept of due process?
And to be clear from the outset, this discussion is grounded entirely in the recent reporting by the Chronicle and CNN, as well as the subsequent official statements from the campaign and Democratic leadership. My perspective today is that the multiplicity and severity of these corroborated journalistic reports fundamentally justify the immediate political response and the withdrawal of institutional support.
And my stance is that allowing unadjudicated allegations to completely dismantle a campaign before any formal law enforcement investigation is even opened, well, it sets a perilous precedent that bypasses due process entirely.
Let's lay out the framework of this situation, because the threshold for political leadership is, and frankly must be, fundamentally different from the threshold of the criminal justice system. We are not talking about putting a man in prison today. We are evaluating his viability to govern the massive state of California. And to do that, we have to look at the sheer weight of the evidence presented in the media. This isn't a singular vague claim whispered in the halls of the Capitol.
Sure.
The San Francisco Chronicle's bombshell report, which was about a former female staffer who worked directly under the congressman, was highly specific. She alleged inappropriate physical contact on 2 separate occasions, noting that during one of those encounters, she was in no position to give consent due to her level of intoxication.
Yeah, those are severe claims.
Right, very severe. And the Chronicle didn't just print a rumor. They reviewed contemporaneous text messages connected to the alleged incidents, and they spoke with multiple friends she had confided in at the time. Furthermore, CNN's independent investigation surfaced 4 women in total.
4 women, right?
Yeah. You have one woman appearing on camera with her identity concealed, explicitly describing physically resisting Swalwell and verbally telling him to stop. You have another alleging he sent unsolicited, explicit photographs without her consent. So when detailed allegations like these spanning multiple behaviors are brought forward by multiple independent sources, political institutions have a duty to act immediately. The electorate expects leadership to be above reproach, which fully justifies the party's calls for him to withdraw.
Well, I hear the severity of what is being alleged, and I definitely don't diminish the seriousness of those claims. But we must acknowledge that the presumption of innocence is entirely meaningless if a politician's career can be structurally dismantled within 24 hours based solely on journalistic reports.
Okay, but
We have to look at the concrete pushback from Swalwell's camp, which has been absolute. He has denied these allegations completely and forcefully. His official statement called them absolutely false and fabricated.
Right, which you'd expect any candidate to say.
True, but more importantly, this isn't just standard public relations spin. His legal team has actively sent formal cease and desist letters to at least 2 of the women, demanding retractions and calling the accounts entirely untrue. A cease and desist in this context is a highly aggressive legal maneuver.
Yeah, it's definitely a serious step.
It essentially signals a readiness to move into the discovery phase of a defamation lawsuit.
It tells the recipient to preserve their documents because a legal fight is coming. And crucially, as of now, no law enforcement investigation has been officially opened. He has not been charged with any crime.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are operating entirely outside the legal system, the swift abandonment by campaign staff and political allies represents a dangerous rush to judgment. I mean, essentially it replaces civic fact-finding with a trial by media, stripping a candidate of their right to face their accusers in a setting governed by actual rules of evidence.
I see why you think that. But let me give you a different perspective on the nature of journalistic corroboration versus legal due process. You point out that no law enforcement investigation is open, and you emphasize the legal weight of a cease and desist.
Right.
But waiting for the incredibly slow wheels of the legal system is politically untenable in a highly accelerated campaign environment. I mean, a police investigation can take 6 months to a year just to reach a charging decision.
That's fair.
The political calendar does not pause for that. And I think we need to give more credit to the standard of proof in a newsroom like the San Francisco Chronicle or CNN. When the Chronicle reviews contemporaneous text messages, they are establishing a digital paper trail from the time of the event, which helps establish state of mind and timeline.
Mm-hmm.
When they interview multiple confidants, they are establishing a pattern of disclosure. They are performing a robust form of evidentiary verification. And when CNN puts a woman on camera who details physical resistance and verbal boundaries that were allegedly ignored, well, that crosses a threshold of public interest that a political party simply cannot ignore while waiting for a police report that may or may not ever be filed.
Wait, I need to stop you there, because you're equating editorial standards with legal verification, and those are vastly different mechanisms. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Okay, go ahead.
Treating media reports as a final verdict is like ordering the complete demolition of a building based on a preliminary structural rumor before the engineers even arrive with their instruments. Yes, journalists review texts. Yes, they speak to friends.
Which is a form of investigation.
It is, but journalists do not have subpoena power. They cannot compel the production of exculpatory evidence. They do not cross-examine witnesses under oath under the penalty of perjury. They just don't have access to the full repository of digital evidence that a forensic legal team would have during discovery.
I mean, no, they don't have subpoena power, but...
And by sending those formal cease and desist letters, Swalwell's campaign is demonstrating that they view these allegations as contestable fabrications. And resolving a contested fabrication requires a legal arena, where both sides have the power of compulsion and the rules of evidence apply. It should not be resolved in a political arena governed by public relations in panic.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. The political arena isn't just governed by panic, it is governed by trust. And when the foundation of trust is eroded by multiple highly detailed reports from reputable outlets, the political apparatus has to respond to the reality on the ground.
Right.
Which brings us to the actual velocity of this fallout. Think about the timeline we saw on April 10th. Eric Swalwell isn't some fringe, unknown candidate. He has been a sitting congressman representing the East Bay since 2013. He sat on the highly sensitive House Intelligence Committee.
Oh, absolutely. He was a heavyweight.
Exactly. He had significant momentum as a frontrunner in the California governor's race. For a campaign of that magnitude, with that level of institutional backing, to go from full momentum to near collapse in exactly 24 hours is virtually unprecedented.
Yeah, it was fast.
It signifies that the internal political apparatus recognizes a critical, unrecoverable failure. Look at the mass resignation of multiple senior campaign staffers. These are people inside the tent. They see the internal polling, they see the candidates' private reactions, and they understand the underlying data. If they are resigning en masse within hours of a report dropping, it validates the severity of the situation. It suggests they see the writing on the wall and know the campaign is fundamentally compromised.
But those staffers aren't acting in a vacuum, and their panic isn't necessarily a barometer of truth. I come at it from a different way. The 24-hour timeline isn't proof of the allegation's validity. It is precisely the problem.
How so?
It highlights a systemic panic response rather than a measured pursuit of facts. We have to understand how the political consulting class actually works. Political consulting is essentially a high-stakes gig economy. Staffers are hired from election cycle to election cycle, and their reputation is their only currency.
Sure, it's a small world.
Right. So when a bombshell report drops, the immediate instinct is career self-preservation. Senior campaign staffers resigning within a day aren't conducting an objective forensic assessment of the candidate's guilt or innocence. They are looking at a political earthquake and fleeing the epicenter to protect their own future employability.
I mean,
If they stay attached to a campaign that is deemed quote-unquote toxic, rival campaigns won't hire them next cycle, and donors will stop taking their calls. They face industry blacklisting. So the sheer speed of this mass exodus actually precludes any possibility of a rational defense. How can a candidate mount a factual, methodical counter-narrative when their own infrastructure abandons them before the sun even sets?
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it assumes the entire party apparatus, from the junior staffers all the way up to the highest echelons of power, is acting irrationally or purely out of self-interest, rather than institutional protection.
Well, they are protecting themselves.
But their panic is a direct reflection of the signals coming from the top. And that brings us to the role of party leadership in this crisis. Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, arguably the most powerful figure in California Democratic politics, and House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries didn't just express mild concern.
No, they did not.
They demanded full transparency, called for an investigation, and stated Swalwell should withdraw from the race. Fellow gubernatorial candidates immediately called for him to step down. By doing this, they aren't passing a legal judgment. They are protecting the broader political institution from the collateral damage of a protracted scandal. Let me offer a different analogy.
Okay.
Instead of a sinking ship, think of the party as an immune system. The party isn't judging the moral guilt of a virus. It is simply raising its temperature to expel a foreign body that threatens the survival of the host. Pelosi and Jeffries recognize the mechanics of the political calendar. You cannot pause fundraising, canvassing, or ad buys for 6 months while a scandal drags through the press.
I get the practical reality of it, but
Defending a candidate against 4 distinct severe allegations of misconduct involving intoxication, lack of consent, and explicit photographs would sink the broader party's credibility and essentially hand the election to the opposition.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered what happens to the structural integrity of the democratic process when the immune system becomes hyperactive and starts attacking healthy cells?
What do you mean?
You're talking about weaponization.
Exactly.
You incentivize the weaponization of unverified claims. Swalwell has insisted he will remain in the race and continue fighting these allegations. But practically speaking, how does he do that? The party heavyweights have preemptively cut off his path forward. They haven't just protected the institution, they have actively starved his campaign of the oxygen it needs to mount a defense.
But they are responding to the oxygen that has already been sucked out of the room by the sheer volume of the claims. I mean, the political reality is that a candidate simply cannot effectively run a massive state economy if their daily operational bandwidth is consumed by defending themselves against multiple, highly detailed allegations across 2 major independent news organizations.
Yeah.
The institution cannot afford to wait for a legal system that was designed to protect citizens from state power, not to protect politicians from losing their campaigns. The standard for governing is higher, and the swift, brutal political reality he is facing is a necessary mechanism for maintaining public trust.
But the cost of maintaining that public trust cannot be the complete erosion of a fundamental civic right. The presumption of innocence becomes a completely hollow phrase if a sitting congressman can be politically executed by his own party's leadership before a single official charge is ever filed. If we accept this 24-hour standard, we effectively accept that trial by media is the highest court in the land for anyone seeking public office. We replace the scales of justice with the speed of the news cycle.
Yet, despite our profound disagreement on the timeline, the mechanics of his campaign's collapse, and the role of party leadership, I think there is a deep convergence here. We both agree that the allegations brought forward by these 4 women are deeply serious, and we both acknowledge the immense, perhaps insurmountable, difficulty of Swalwell's current political path.
absolutely. The tension we are discussing isn't theoretical. It has real human consequences. navigating this space between respecting the voices of accusers who come forward to the press and maintaining the rigorous structural standards of due process remains one of the most profoundly complex challenges in modern politics. There are no easy answers when the stakes for the individuals involved and the democratic system itself are this high.
Which leaves us with the central question at this entire event. We've seen the political circuit breaker's snapshot. We've seen the power cut to a major gubernatorial campaign in exactly 24 hours, driven by rigorous reporting but absent of formal legal investigation. What we don't know yet, and what the electorate and history will ultimately have to decide, is whether a campaign can or ever should survive this kind of unprecedented immediate storm.